Welcome to this episode of It's Not You, but Sometimes It Is, the podcast of real C-suite leaders talking about the real crap they've faced and what they have gained from it. And this episode, I just had an absolute joy talking with Evelyn Franco, the COO of Frontier Bank. Really not traditional route into the world of banking. And one of the most reflective people I have ever had the honor of talking with. And we talked a lot about being a female in the C-suite in a very male-dominated profession of banking. And I know you're really going to enjoy the conversation. Thank you and have a great time. All right, welcome to this episode of It's Not You, but Sometimes It Is. And I am so pleased to welcome Evelyn Franco, the Chief Operating Officer at Frontier Bank of Texas, here in Austin with me. So welcome, Evelyn. Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, hi Meg. It's really great to be here. I appreciate the invitation. Excited to be part of the conversation.
We had a really fun little call where I can tell that you've been so thoughtful about some of the topics that we talk about on this podcast. So I'm really excited. Can you give our listeners a little bit more background about the bank and your kind of trajectory into your C-suite role, and just kind of the unique situation you're in there?
Yeah, sure. So, as I mentioned, I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Frontier Bank of Texas. We're a community bank based out of Elegant, Texas, which is about 20 miles east of Austin. We have 10 locations and we serve the central Texas market. We started the bank, we're a relatively young bank. We've only been in business for 18 years, and we really scaled the bank over the last 8 years, but it's been a really just a fun journey. It's also it has that kind of startup mentality, and so that always makes your job just a lot of fun. Um, as far as like my role goes, well, we had a little bit of a conversation about this before, but I always like this question because as I meet other CEOs or CFOs, it's really interesting to know like what their background is because I don't think there's a career, like a very clear path on how to get here. So it's always really interesting to hear other people's stories. So I'll just mention that, while mine is probably retail based, I don't think that you necessarily need to have my background to be able to get to that level. But I've been in banking for 22 years. So I've done this for a really long time. But I actually started as a part-time teller position in a motor bank. Again, you and I had a little bit of conversation about that I really only applied to the bank to please my mother. I did not think I was going to be in banking. This is Hotel California. Once you get in, you're really not going to leave. But no, I wanted to be a nurse. And my senior year, I actually discovered that my parents didn't have the means to be able to send me to college. But we made too much money to be able to afford, or I'm sorry, to be able to get loans. And so I needed to pay for my education. And so at the time, the school that I went to had a co-op program where they could help you get your EMT license. And so I got my EMT license and I kind of figured this was going to be my way to pay for college. And help me become a nurse. And so I was working the third shift, which is really late at night in the back of the ambulance. My mom did not like that. And I was going to school. I went to U of H, and my mom always talked to me about her banker. Her name is Nora. She is still my parents' banker back in Houston. And she would always tell me how Nora had, she wore these beautiful dresses and she had regular hours and she was in the office and she just really wished her daughter wasn't out at 3 a.m, chasing people and in motorcycle accidents and, drunk people off the road. So I applied for the role as a part-time teller thinking they would never call me back. And I just did to kind of please her. And they did call me back. And I thought I'd never get hired because I didn't have cash handling experience, but they did hire me. Um, and so I was going to school, I was working at the bank for 4 hours a day, and then I was also doing third shift as an EMT. And I continued to do that for some time. I had an experience in the medical field that actually kind of taught me that your health isn't necessarily driven by, or the healthcare that you receive isn't necessarily driven by somebody that cares and wants to serve and do all those things, but it's really about how much you can afford. You have to be able to afford good health care. It's not about intention. And so that was really a really big pivotal point in my just personal growth. And I did learn that you have to kind of follow the money. I worked at the bank, follow the money there. And so I changed my major, went to business administration, and then stayed with a bank during that time. I worked for Washington Mutual. That bank was actually bought over by a larger institution. But when I was a part-time teller, I worked in the motor bank, and it was very little excitement. And I would go from adrenaline to sitting for hours and really only having one person next to me, and I didn't really talk to very many people. And so I asked my manager how I could work in the lobby where I could have more people interaction. And so they said you'd have to get referrals. So that was a tough thing to do because you essentially had to convince people to leave their vehicle and drive around to the main building and get out and speak to a banker about a service. And so I did that just to honestly have some more excitement in my life and to be in the lobby. And so I did that. And then I got to be in the lobby. And from there, I think it was just much easier to do that job. And so I quickly became a banker after that. I was a banker for about 6 years. And during that time, I wanted to continue to grow. I was still paying for, school. I was living on my own and paying for my own bills at the time. And so when Washington Mutual was bought over by the large institution, which is a $1 trillion company, they were going to have layoffs. And so my manager at the time said, you're a banker and you have really a lot of success here. And if you continue down this track to be an assistant branch manager, they're going to have a duplication of managers. And it's very likely you're going to be like, oh. And so that was my very first time of experiencing kind of a setback. It was really difficult to hear that, but I was appreciative that he was honest with me. And so I stuck around. I played the part. I was a team player. I learned all the new products and services and helped my customers navigate that. That merger took 1.5 years to complete. So I really had to play the long game on that one. But I had a new manager with this new organization, and I went to her after the merger was complete and said, hey, I don't know if you're aware, but I was on the assistant manager track and I want to be able to do that. That was more, assistant branch manager was more operations driven than sales driven. And so I came to her and I said, I don't know if you're aware of this. This is what I want to do. And she told me, I actually don't think that that's a good fit for you. I don't think that this is where you're best suited. And that was, again, I was like, oh my goodness, I did all these things. What's going to happen now? And it was really difficult to hear. But to my surprise, she said, actually, I think that you're better suited in a branch manager role, not an assistant branch manager role. And I think it's going to ask you to stretch a little bit, but I think that you can do it. And so it actually turned out to be really great news. And I then went into that track. I was a manager for about 10 years. And I managed anything from $70 million books to about $350 million books, different technology package. The biggest team that I managed was 18 employees. And then towards the tail end of my time with that company, I was more in dealing with high net worth individuals and high net worth families. And it's more like tailored boutique style banking. And then I had a coworker that had left that institution and worked for Frontier Bank. And so I spoke to him and that was a big moment in my time because I had built a career for myself. I had a lot of really great connections. I built a name for myself, and just kind of quote unquote start over was a really daunting thing to do. But the organization I was with had another reorganization where they flatlined their hierarchy. And so they got rid of assistant branch managers and district managers. And at that time I was supporting the biggest book in the market, but then also assisting 6 other locations with hiring and then audits. And so I knew that if I was in the district manager role, I'd go from managing 6 locations to 12, and I think that was doable. But to go to 24 was a really big stretch, and I probably wasn't going to be able to do that in an effective way or be good at it. And so I knew that it was going to take a lot of time, and I'd probably have to figure out what I'd have to do in the meantime. And so when I met back with my colleague that had left that organization, he introduced me to our CEO, which is Patrick Johnson. And I tell him this, but when I went through that interview process, there's two things that stuck out to me. One is he asked, the bank had just invested in technology, and he asked me what my thought process was. I had actually piloted that technology for the previous organization I was with and was really familiar with it. And I was very honest with the feedback about what it could do for employees, what it did for customers, how it would work out. And I had never been asked that. In the previous organization that I was with, it was very top down. This is what you get. You just follow what's being given to you. And that really stuck out to me, that I could tell by his follow-up question that he was actually listening and that he actually cared about my feedback. So that was really important to me. And then the bank was actually started by 6 women, which is very atypical in our industry, to have women leadership, let alone just your C-suite to be women. Definitely a male-dominated industry. So when I thought about my leap of faith in comparison to theirs, they left their really well-paying jobs to start a bank with, you don't know if it's going to if it's going to pan out. And so when I thought about my leap of faith, it seemed so much smaller than theirs, and it gave me perspective that it's not as scary as it could be in my head. And so I decided to come work for Frontier Bank, and it's been a really great experience. Actually, when I left, I actually had it was not a pay increase. It was not an increase in my position. I was very honest with the organization that I had managed for over 10 years and that I wanted to continue to grow, but that I was willing to open up and venture into this new market that the board had decided to do or go into. And so I opened the first location. And during that process, the bank I knew that the bank was trying to grow. And I'm always somebody that kind of looks for the gaps and tries to help in those ways. And so I created what's called it's a branch playbook. Essentially, the bank hadn't built a location over 10 years. So the vendors and process that we had before no longer applied. And so I created kind of like a project management sheet of vendors that you could use and timelines and, hiring. And it was part of the construction phase and managing the expenses of it. And so I put that together, and I not thinking anything would ever happen of it. But I gave that to Patrick, and I said, I know that the bank is trying to grow. This was really helpful for me. Here's my notes and here's my playbook for the next manager. I'm happy to share. I'm happy to teach or train or whatever you want me to do with the next profit center manager. And thinking nothing was going to come of it. He had me then present it to the board. And then I did help that next manager, and that actually became my next position. I became the director of strategy and marketing, and I helped build the next 8 locations, a commercial building, 3 loan production offices. And so that became my new role. So not necessarily a chart of how to get there, but that's what I did for a few years. The marketing side of it was actually funny. Same thing. There was we just couldn't afford to pay somebody that did marketing for us at the time. And so I was like, okay, well, we have a need and we need to get the word out because we're now going to bigger markets and we need to create a name and a face for ourselves. And so there's one other girl that was posting things online. And so I just kind of took that on. I'm creative in nature anyways. And so I was like, okay, I'll help with ads. And we did work with an agency. I tell Patrick this all the time too, is that so I created not our logo because that was already created, but our signage. I created sketched what I wanted it to look like, what I thought. I worked with a vendor to be able to do that, and now it's in all our locations. So I was like, even if you change your mind about me one day, I will always be here. I will always live on. And so yeah, it just became a part of it. And then when our COO retired, I went into this role, and I've been in this role for a couple of years, and it's probably one of the most rewarding, fun roles that I've had. So it's really great.
Awesome. Like you said, Evelyn, I think people take completely random paths, especially into a COO role. And what I have seen as a common thread is y'all all find problems before other people do and solve problems before other people knew it was a problem. And you're just very proactive and self-driven and critical thinkers. That seems to be what it takes. And that there's no right or wrong path. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you have obviously been someone who's willing to step up to challenges of any kind. Oh, we need marketing. I'll try that. Right. And there's also just in leadership, there's all kinds of difficult things that come up that we don't expect. Can you give me an example of something that was a really difficult challenge that you personally had to overcome on your path in leadership?
I would say overcoming other people's limiting beliefs, not even my own. I mean, that's like on your own responsibility. Like you are responsible for challenging your own mindset, but others, right? People put and project their ceilings and their thought process on yours based on their experience, and they're not wrong, and it's helpful, but you have to be able to um, take that feedback and realize like what lens are they coming from, and can you take some from that to be better, but don't let those beliefs be your own, because it will honestly just stifle your growth, and that's not helpful to them, it's not helpful to you. And so just really overcoming other people's beliefs is probably one that I think that that's important at any stage of your career, even now, even before, whatever the future holds. It's just not letting those things get in the way.
Yeah. And it takes an incredible amount of discernment to receive their perspective and their feedback, but also challenge it in your head and go, well, what about this is meaningful and helpful? And what about it am I going to push back on because I have a different perspective? And that's hard. That's also hard when you're a young woman in a male-dominated profession to push
Yes.
back and say, actually, no,
Yes.
I don't
Yes.
accept that limitation.
Yeah, I always say, because people will ask me, like, especially on the female side of things, I said, my thought process is like, I remember that I'm a female, but I forget. And what I mean by that is that I remember that I'm female in a male dominated industry when it's time for my to help, to give somebody else a voice,
Mm.
because they may not have the same opportunities that I do. And so remembering that, but then forgetting when you're in those rooms where you look around and you're like, I am the only female, or like, well, there's one other female in a room full of men that are much more senior than you. That's when I forget, it doesn't matter that I'm a female. And like, I know that I have a seat at this table and that I earned it, and I believe in myself, and I will, stand strong in that.
Mhm.
So I think it's important as a female in any industry is to remember when you can give back, but don't let that drive or impact how you show up.
Yeah, love it. Love it. Okay, so as a CEO and a branch manager, a lot of roles you're in, you have had to shape a culture in various locations or with different teams. And it sounds like you came into a culture that was pretty intentional and focused on empowering people and listening to the ideas, even in your interview, asking for your input on things, right? That is a very special culture. So they also say that culture can eat strategy for breakfast if your culture isn't going well. So can you give us examples of where you've seen little cultural challenges really at any point in your career in any company? What have been some issues where you've seen about the way people are showing up and interacting and the beliefs they held, the attitudes, right? What was the challenge and how did you see it impact the business and how did you try and reshape it or influence it?
Yeah, I definitely think you need a level of strategy, right? You can't just go without a plan. You have to have a
Yeah,
plan in place so that you're moving with purpose.
yeah.
But culture is really actually what's going to drive the results. And what comes to mind is a couple years ago, we had a core conversion, which is a complete infrastructure change for your customers, for you. Everybody will have to learn how to do their job all over again. And in this particular case, our legacy employees, so this core system was what we used with the inception of the bank. And so we had legacy employees that were experts.
Mhm.
And if we went through this conversion, then there really wasn't going to be any experts. And then we would baseline the understanding of everybody. And that was impactful because change is hard for everybody. It's going to be change for our customers. But we knew that our strategy was to continue to grow, and that it was better for us to do it at the time that we did it so that we can continue to scale.
Mhm.
But really what helped us get through that is that um, we needed to depend on each other, and we needed to remember why we were doing it for our customers, why we were doing it for ourselves, and just really help each other out. It was long hours and it was very difficult and it took a really long time. I mean, it took us 3 years to make the decision and 18 months to implement. And so just remembering that we were all going to have bad days, to have grace for each other when we did have bad days, and that whenever you saw that a peer was struggling, that you help them and take things off their table, or just help them, have a different perspective, because they were going to do that for you. And I think that was going through that experience as a company really helped us test our values, test our friendship, and just our strategy, right? Because there's many times where we're like, did we make the right decision? Should we have done this? We should have just stayed where we were. That would have been easier. But I think leaning on your culture is really what is going to get you through tough times. Strategy, it isn't. So.
Awesome. Awesome. So, a little bit more on the personal side, Evelyn. Sometimes we learn about how we want to lead by experiencing leadership that does not work well, right? Like some of those bad bosses, some of those situations we've been in. Can you give me an example of what you've learned from inoptimal leadership, from a bad boss or just someone who wasn't very effective with you? And what did you change and carry forward?
Yeah. Okay. Well, one I'll say is that you don't have to like your boss. You just have to have mutual respect for each other, and
Yeah.
it's okay. You're probably going to learn a lot from somebody that's less than optimal. But as long as you have mutual respect, I think you can always win no matter who your boss is. But I would say that, do you want an example of like a specific time?
Like, yeah, like a or a behavior or trait that they had or an approach that they used that just you were like, I'm never doing this. I'm going to do something different.
Yeah. Okay. So I would say that in my experience, the two things that come to mind is, I had a boss that was probably overly critical. I know I have really high expectations of myself. I know that I have high expectations of my output. And so more oftentimes than none, I'm going to be much harder than what you'll be harder than me. And
Mhm.
so when you have somebody that's overly critical, it doesn't allow you to grow because you want to like deliver the best, and it doesn't allow you to try new things. And that's where I found myself. I kept leaning on the things that I knew I did really well, but I really wasn't growing because I knew that she was going to be overly critical. Another thing I would say is that she wasn't necessarily the best at giving recognition, and I didn't need, praise, but I needed acknowledgement, especially when I was helping her do things that weren't necessarily in my scope, but I
Mm,
wanted to continue to grow and learn and like just help. And instead of, acknowledging, hey, I appreciate that you took that phone call, I appreciate you leading that meeting. I was kind of, it wasn't really acknowledged, and it almost felt like, why am I doing this anyways? I could just
yeah,
make my life easier and do my job and earn my paycheck and get out. But that wasn't in my DNA, and it isn't in my DNA. And so I think those two things were the ones that stick out.
okay.
Making sure that you recognize people whenever they help, or just honestly just recognize that they're contributing to the overall goal. So those are
Yeah,
things.
yeah, absolutely. I don't think we all need to have someone tooting our horn and I say blowing a bunch of sunshine and rainbows at me. Like I know I'm okay. I don't need a lot of recognition, but I do need to feel valued, and appreciated. And I also need to know what I am doing well. And if you're only telling me what I'm not doing well, that's gonna like totally drain me. So
That's
yeah,
exactly it.
yeah. Okay, staying on the personal side here, Evelyn. You know the saying, sometimes we're our own worst enemies, right? And we go through a hard time and we realize like I was actually maybe in a battle with myself, or I needed to let go of some belief or behavior or trait. And I needed to shift something big and change something about myself moving forward. Can you give us an example of where you had one of those moments where you just hit that, like, you know what? I think I'm getting in my own way here. What was it? What did you learn and what did you shift?
I would say that I think this is a trap that we all fall into sometimes, but normally as you continue to grow in your career, you're the expert at certain things and you have all the answers. And then as you continue to grow, you have this mindset that you will always need to know all the answers. And that's just not true.
Mhm.
You need to keep going into bigger rooms. And when you are in those bigger rooms, don't think that you need to know the answer. I think what you need to shift is to like having the right questions so that they can continue to excel in their projects and in their, because they're the experts, right? And so just asking the right questions versus feeling like you need to know the answers. And that can be difficult because it could just kind of be a little bit of a blow to your ego, A, but then B, you're like, oh my God, it makes you question whether you deserve to be in that room and whether you're good enough.
Yeah,
That's a really hard thing to overcome. That yes, I am good enough. And I'm so grateful to be in this room with much smarter, much more capable people. And I need to help them continue to grow and continue to be better than me versus feeling like, well, I'm no longer their go-to person. Right.
yeah,
And so that's a shift that can be a challenging to do again, especially as you continue to climb in your career.
absolutely. Yeah, that humility is it's a big battle. When everyone tells you, and you've been rewarded for having the answers, and they tell you you need to have all the answers, when actually that could be terrible leadership when you get at
Mhm.
that point in your career. I want to close out here, Evelyn, by asking you if I could give you a time machine and you could go back and talk to yourself 10 or 15 years ago. What advice would you give that younger version of you?
This is a fun question. I like these kind of questions because I do a lot of self work on those kind of things. But I would say so. I'd be 30 at the time, and so I would say that to probably trust your instincts.
Mm,
I think over the last 10 years, I've learned to really hone in on my instincts and um, to really follow them, right? Whether that's hiring somebody, letting somebody go, changing vendors, doing all those things. I've learned to do that. But if I could go back and talk to my younger self, I would say that learn to train your instincts, to test your instincts, and to challenge them because that's where you can create wisdom that's going to help you grow. And I think at the time I probably just held myself back. I wouldn't, speak up when I need to speak up. I wouldn't say anything. I just kind of kept those things to myself. And I think I probably could have added a lot more value had I just said, hey,
mm,
based on my experience, based on what I've seen, even just pattern recognition is how you really create, an instinct. But just being able to hone in on those earlier on probably would have been helpful. And again, you learn to like trust yourself and to create wisdom because at this point in my career, I would say the reason that I'm in this role now is the company is trusting my experience, trusting my instincts, and then execution. Those three things I must be
yeah,
able to do no matter what the role is, no matter what the project is to use my experience to help me move forward, to recognize those patterns and just to move forward. And so that's what I would tell my younger self.
love it. I wish I could give you a time machine to go back and tell me that 10 or 15
Yeah, we
years
could
ago.
all use that, right? So many things we would do differently.
Well, thank you, Evelyn, so much for joining us and for your generosity and your authenticity. This was a lot of fun.
It's been really fun. Thank you, Meg.